I'll just do some introductions. My name is Oona Campbell. We're here interviewing Marvin Kaiser for the Public History Lab. All right, so Martin, you ready?
I am.
All right. So my first question is just kind of a background question. So could you provide us with a bit of your professional background leading up to accepting a position at PSU, and what interested you in the university?
Yes, thank you for the question. So my background has mostly been in education. I was teaching at Kansas State University, where I was the director first of the social work programs professor, then the department chair for sociology, anthropology, and social work at Kansas State. Kind of an important piece of this is the Kansas State University, as is Oregon State, a land grant university. So built into the educational institution is the commitment to broaden education and to serve those communities. So the kind of notion of service is an important piece of that, and that's part of the tie to Portland State. But just to say that in my years there, which came after I taught in a small Catholic college, and both of these were obviously in Kansas, but what was happening was we really did in those eras. If you look back to the late 60s and 1970s, we were coming out of a periods of change and the Vietnam War issues, the issues around civil rights, women's rights, very much part of the mix. And I think that's an important context, because it certainly influenced me a lot, but also it was part of the responsibility of institutions to address some of those issues, or to explore how they were dealing with the societal responsibilities that we had. So I became involved because of the Kellogg Foundation. I was a Kellogg Fellow during some of those years, and part of the responsibility of the Kellogg Fellowship indeed was to carry out in a broader sense the mission of the Kellogg Foundation, which was around community development and community building. And one of the programs that we initiated, another colleague and myself, was built around, and if some of you go back, and before AmeriCorps was here, was what was called the Points of Light Foundation. And that was started during the Elder Bush years. And the purpose of it was to bring young people into service for communities. And we did a lot of work bringing teams of students and this kind of thing particularly into rural Kansas communities that was part of as part of their education, and so we now talk about those kinds of things. But it was the predecessor to this kind of thing. And one of the persons I really do want to acknowledge, because he had a pretty profound influence on my life, and part of why I was interested in Portland State University, and which led to coming here. And that was, and Patricia will know him, John Gardner, who was the head of what was then, they called it HEW, Health, Education, and Welfare. He started this wonderful organization called Common Cause, but he made a statement when they started the Public Service Center at Stanford University, which really echoed with me and programmatically was really important. And it's a 9-word statement. He says, if you live in a democracy, and this is about what it means to be an American, and I'm just going to quote his words. He says, freedom and responsibility, liberty and duty, that's the deal. And so when we talk about the notion, and if you look in mission statements, almost any institution of higher education, we talk about one of our roles is to build citizens. So those words about freedom and duty and responsibility really are part of that. But then that question is, how do you build that in to to an institution? So that's part of the background that I've worked on a lot at Kansas State, but also that's what led me to Portland State University.
Thank you for that. That was extremely detailed. Yeah. All right. So yeah, you saw Portland State as, as kind of embodying a lot of the same, the same ideas of, community and education.
That's well, but in Portland State, if I may, that at that moment, I came here in 1993. Judith Rameli was the Kansas folks who came here, but she was working kind of creating a vision for this urban university that somehow or other made it kind of unique, and that urban universities had a particularly unique role in the higher education framework.
Great.
And this process, and you see evidence of it around now. And the one that's always most people I think know about, well, there are two. One of them is university studies, and so that there was a lot of interdisciplinary work and kind of grounding, but also pounding that it was going to be a graduate part of your senior year, using your knowledge connected to the urban environment here in some organizations within the organization. Of course, the other one on the footbridge really is kind of personification of that saying that we adopted here called "Let knowledge serve the city." But that was so I was privileged to come here. Kind of that was being talked about and being developed here. That education and educational institutions are not simply about my own personal growth or intellectual or otherwise, but it was about how I take that responsibility into the broader community.
All right. Thank you. All right, so my next question is, so at what point in the formation of the conflict resolution program did you arrive at PSU? And because we talked yesterday about how it was in talks when you got there, but it wasn't quite off the ground. So if you could elaborate on that a little bit more. And then as the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences as a whole, to what extent were you involved in the program?
Well, there, as you probably remember, there were other conversations that went on back in the 1980s, actually, but also Elizabeth Furs, who was our representative, U.S. representative here, who was very much interested in peace studies, and that was sort of the background. As I came to the university, those conversations were still taking place. There had been, and I'm relying on Rob, it reminded me of this, that there had been some discussion around 1990 of a program. It didn't occur. It happened here. There was like a summer program as sort of the seeds at the beginning at the University of Portland. But it was after I came here in 1993, then I think it must have been about a year later, half a year later, that I had some conversations in earnest about creating an academic program in both peace studies and in conflict resolution.
Are you still there? Sorry.
Do you want me to go into some further detail than about that?
No, sorry. I'm just still having a little bit of technical problems.
Oh,
so.
I'm sorry.
Okay. No, I mean, it's no one's fault. It's
okay.
All right. So could you repeat your last sentence? Sorry, I couldn't.
Yeah, but I believe what I said was it was about in that year 1993 and 1994 that I met Rob Gould early, the program, although there was some I guess I would say I wasn't particularly aware of it, but a little bit of competition with the university as to where such a program might be, whether better served in urban studies in terms of organizational structure, or would it be better if it was in the College of Arts and Sciences?
Oh.
And so that was an mission at that point.
Okay. Could you tell us a little bit more about the conversations around the competition of which should it be in which of the colleges?
Well, part of it is if we go back and kind of look at where a lot of the interest was, I think was related more to peace studies at that point, and that came out of sort of the history that started in the 70s. And Portland State was an important part of that, but there were a lot of people associated with the university and in the community who were really committed to the notion of peace studies. The conflict so where does peace studies is kind of an interdisciplinary program, if you think about it that way. Where does that belong? Is it part of government in one sense, or is it really a piece of kind of what I would describe as liberal learning? That this kind of notion of critical thinking and ethical behavior and looking at structures, from kind of that critical thinking perspective, does that fit in the liberal studies? And that certainly was my view of this thing, and that we could draw upon, therefore, the programs that were across the college that would have some bearing on peace studies. But along with that, I mean, at the same time, I think there was this kind of notion that that conflict resolution could be, and I'm going to use the word professionalized. In other words, it would be akin to a social degree in one sense. You want to have a skill set that you can bring to building peace, whether that's in between two individuals, a local community, or much more broadly. And so it was really the kind of the fit. So you peace studies is kind of a liberal learning kind of thing, along with professions you needed to become skilled at conflict resolution, that a good home for it could be in arts and sciences. And what happened in as kind of the result of that, I think, is that we had people in the college then for whom they had some, were drawing, I mean, students who were interested were coming from various departments. And so kind of interestingly enough, in kind of some of those early days of, as the program was kind of organizing itself and finally became an established program, I believe it was in 1996. So it took those 2 to 3 years, but in the interim, there was interest like in communication studies. But the stronger kind of home, the thinking, and part of that was because Rob Gould was a philosopher himself and doing some adjunct teaching in that department, that the Department of Philosophy became kind of the original home for that. And there was support there, and intellectual support and professional support in that program.
Great, thank you. All right, so I'm going to ask you another question. Let's see, sorry. So what were your initial thoughts of, when you got there, what were your initial thoughts of, you know, the intent of the program, and did that change over, did you notice a change in the intent of the program over time, and the goals and how it was initially structured?
Well, as I said, my recollection of it is that the first kind much more focused on what one might call peace studies, and that there was a background for that with Elizabeth Furs and Rob Gould himself, and a number of other individuals, Mel Gertoff among others at the university, for whom kind of peace studies was a touch point, I might say. But in the transition, I think it was that conflict resolution might provide a better framework for identifying the program, including this commitment in some ways to peace studies, however one would define that. What emerged out of this was, in my understanding at least, kind of this described before, the kind of what we now call conflict resolution, but creating a curriculum and professionalizing it so that you would bring a lot of the concepts of peace studies into it, but you would also create when I called it professionalizing it as kind of a skill base that students could out with them when they graduated from that program. But that was also in a way, I think, what led us to start then with the graduate program. And when I went back and looked at, I think it was 1997 when the graduate program was initially approved, that we moved forward with this. So professionalizing it, like a graduate, in some ways one could describe it as a graduate professional program.
So yeah, so it became less, not necessarily less theoretical, but it moved from, you know, putting it into practice.
Yes, right.
All right.
And there was some there was some demand for that because around Oregon and in Portland there were a number of kind of conflict. They were engaged there with some form, with some, as I understand it, with some county governments.
Oh, so there was like a
And
demand.
so there was like home for this, you know, when you graduate, what, you know, the questions is, are there places where I can carry out my academic program that I believe in and cared a lot about? And so that was an important issue also.
All right, great, thank you. So there's, I mean, I guess you kind of touched on this before, but I guess one of the questions I keep having when with this, thinking about this program and how this program emerged this whole time is, so there's so much overlap. And I think that comes from it being kind of a very interdisciplinary subject, but there's so much overlap between already established fields at PSU, like sociology, psychology, communication, etc. So what I've been asking myself is, what were the needs? What were the academic needs that the conflict resolution program addressed that these already established programs at PSU were lacking? If that makes sense.
Yes, and it's an important question. It seems to me, but what it's building, it builds off of a couple of things at least, and maybe some more. But in this transition, I think, of Portland State to this kind of what's it mean to be an urban university? That was part of kind of the background, I think, in a lot of this, and and included in this is very much of what I described, the academic pieces of the university
I'm sorry, you're cutting.
are how do we knowledge? I'm sorry. How do we bring that knowledge to bear on the community in which we reside and in which we serve? So academic programs can stand alone sometimes in a way of an intellectual body of knowledge, and the focus is on that intellectual body, and that's an important issue. But if you're going to also build into it, how do you bring that knowledge together for an application that I could take with me and use that application on behalf of my own, what I want to do with my life, but also in the community. So you take sociology and you take concepts out of social work and you take it out of political science and you know, economics. You draw upon all of those, but in kind of trying to direct this into that kind of like a funnel, as I could visualize this, in which you say, okay, I need to know those concepts, understand those concepts, but if I'm going to go out and apply those on behalf of resolving conflicts, resolving disparities among individuals. If I'm going to create peace, what's the skill set that I know? So to repeat myself, I'm drawing on these knowledge sources that are important to me, that make this, that I really can be a peace builder, conflict resolver, positive statement, and a different kind of statement about what we're engaged with. So you package those together, but build onto it a skill set. My own background, I happen to be I have an MSW, a master's degree in social work, among my higher education degrees. But what social work is, it draws upon a range of disciplines, political science and economics, sociology, psychology. You think of those kind of things, but then you said, okay, with this knowledge, here's a skill set that I'm going to use that in my life under the rubric of social work. So it's this kind of combination.
Yeah.
Excuse me, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so you would kind of classify it more as, not like there necessarily being a lack of anything missing from the other programs. It's just kind of pulling from a lot of different other programs to kind of put something in practice.
That's correct. I mean, and I think one thing I should say, I think this was part of what was happening in higher education also during this period, and certainly was happening at Portland State, because like the conflict resolution doesn't just kind of stand alone in terms of some of the transitions that were happening. I mean, I was delighted in my years there, we were able to build the Chicano Latino Studies program. The Women's Studies program was already there, but it was moving in a direction that we were able to support and did a great job. Black Studies was already there, but it was taking on a place. But drawing and all of the environmental studies, drawing on a range of disciplines out there, but kind of to focus them around kind of a goal or a vision about what we wanted to do with this on behalf of certain, whether it's certain populations or certain groups or certain policies, that kind of thing. So you want to build those skill sets in along with the academic background. I might say, in a way, what I understand, and thank you all of you so much for being in this public history program. So in a way, it carries some of that kind of framing. We expect you to be great historians, those of you that are in the history department, but public history draws upon principles of history, and Patricia, you tell me if I'm speaking out of turn here, but it also, you're building a lot of skills around communication and research, and that when you walk and graduate from the university with a degree like this, you have a firm knowledge base grounded in history in many ways, but also with a lot of other kinds of academic expertise that you've drawn from other programs.
That's extremely well said, Marvin. Excellent.
Thank you. I was afraid I was getting in some deep water here.
Yeah, no. Giving you a big high five over the internet.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably exactly from my limited of experience so far with public history. So that's pretty similar.
Yeah.
And actually, that leads pretty good into my final question. So, and I think you were talking about conflict resolution in the same, along with like these other programs that came that were established while you were dean that were, you know, like Chicano history and Black history and women's history, or, you know, well, studies.
Right.
Did and kind of taking kind of an active approach to these, and almost what I would consider as like, you know, taking all this knowledge that you get in higher education and kind of almost taking an activist approach to it. And what are we going to do with this knowledge? Do you think that the time, you know, the 90s, when, you know, when these programs were established, do you think that the political climate at the time, you know, I mean, it was established right after, or they were forming it right as the Gulf War was going on and then ended. Do you think that that had a impact, and that?
Well, that's an interesting question. My sense is that it did have an impact, although, you know, you know, I come from an earlier era, obviously, and I want to say, you know, for someone of my age, I mean, to be growing up and be around universities and that whole environment was so exciting. If you can imagine what was going on in the 60s and 70s, and it wasn't just the music of those eras, but this kind of notion of questioning and saying we have a responsibility to take the gifts that we have been given of education, and we need to be doing something about it, and this kind of willingness to address some of the issues that our generation didn't see as appropriate to where we should be as a democracy and the leadership of the United States. I think one of the things that on the peace movement, in many ways, really, the Vietnam War had a kind of profound impact on that, and that was still in the midst, I think, of folks who were faculty of older students at the university. I think that's one of the issues. The other issue, though, that really I think is really important is this kind of notion: what is the particular role and vision of an urban university? I mean, are we just a replication of the University of Oregon?
Mm-hmm.
You know, we know that there's some distinction between here, but what is it about urban universities that ought to be distinctive? And I think that was also in that mix at that point. And that is there kind of a sense of responsibility that they have for the environment in which they draw their students, the majority of their students, from, and how they're supported, in which we all live. And so a program like this, and some of the other programs that we actually talked about, these interdisciplinary programs, I think also came out of that mix, I think, as well. But the peace movement had a lot to do with Vietnam and post-Vietnam. And one person that I should mention, who I think was just had a significant influence on us during that period, was a gentleman by the name of Al Jubitz, and I hope you've heard of him during the course of
we talked to him on
your
Wednesday.
program. Oh, good. Well, Al is a remarkable guy, as you know. I mean, and I always remember so well in all these discussions that were going on, and he was very supportive of conflict resolution, literally, I mean, in terms of his dollars as well, which was wonderful. But he was so committed to the notion of peace building, and that he was willing to give, you know, his dollars, but his ideas. And I trust he talked to you about his role with Rotary, in which he said if Rotary had a role in stopping polio because of the work they did around the globe, his parallel to that, and he traveled all around the place. We had meetings in various places that Al would call together about if what happened with polio, that could happen with peace. And that's why the peace studies program, or the peace component of conflict resolution, really was so important to individuals like him. Elizabeth Furs, along with Al, you know, but there were people out there in this community. And again, this wasn't far-fetched for Portland State, given something we just celebrated, or I don't know if we celebrated the other day, about the park blocks issues in the 70s. So it was in the DNA, in a way, of Portland State.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. I guess I'm thinking of it as, you know, as a thing of, you know, we've in this class, we've been thinking of it as almost a continuation, you know, this kind of the Vietnam War, in that there was kind of this general, you know, ideas of you know, anti-war sentiment, and people who, this continuation of people who grew up and would have been drafted in the Vietnam War, you know, staying in their community and doing anti-war work in the 90s then.
That's correct. I think you're onto something important there, but that was there. And if you think of the life cycle, Patricia, I'm going to use that terminology here, of faculty members, you know, they came out of that experience with Vietnam and the protests, and they were sort of in the mid-career of their own lives, and that kind of that memory, I think, and the importance of that in their lives. I mean, one of the great blessings of that, it seems to me, is that it's easy to forget. And I'm talking particularly about the civil rights movement of the 60s, and the importance of that. I mean, and how do we keep that alive? And because so many of the people, and I'm pleased to say that people like me and a lot of my friends, maybe we marched in those days and we were part of that. How do you bring that then into your life as you go forward, and particularly given the privilege of an education, and what is the responsibility that carries with it? That's an important part of the structure of a university, that it isn't just about what it does for me. It's what I bring with it as well when I go out into my life. I mean, I like to use the example that we used a lot in those days when service learning was really a big deal, and this kind of notion of universities, and Portland State was part of that national movement of universities around these centers for public service, that kind of concept of that's part of our responsibility. And we always, as I started saying, we say in our mission statements, every university, that we are building citizens of the future. And it's interesting, at least from my perspective, if we say we're creating people who are enlightened, literary folks, or enlightened mathematicians, we want people to practice that, you know, and during their time at the university. So we don't just say, well, they'll get to that later. But programs like this, and many of these interdisciplinary programs that were created along with the strength of the disciplinary programs, including history and philosophy and anthropology and the sciences at Portland State, that here was a program that created ways and opportunities along with the university studies program. And this was the university at work in terms of preparing students for what their lives as citizens would be, as well as their lives as an economist or social worker or teacher, for that matter.
Thank you.
Sorry to be too evangelical about this.
No, I think it's great. So we're almost at 1:50, but I did, so if anyone in this class has to go, feel free to clock out. But I did want to give an opportunity for people in the class who are not me to ask questions if they have them for Marvin. So yeah, feel free to just turn your mic on and ask any questions if you would like.
I don't have any questions. I just wanted to come back on camera.
Oh, okay. All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Just-
That was a great talk. I really enjoyed what you had to say. For sure.
Cleophas, do you have a question?
I do. So what do you think the future of conflict resolution should look like in peace studies?
Oh, wonderful.
Well, a good question. Well, I'm pleased now, let me say, that it has an undergraduate component to it. I think what that does, it opens up kind of the values that are there, right? That I think that's important. I do think, though, that I would want to speak about for the graduate program, as when I keep using that term about being professionalized, but what we need with a program like that, it seems to me, is that we're developing opportunities for people to become reflective practitioners in peace studies and conflict resolution, because so much of the debates that seem to me are going on around disparities in this country and divisions that lend themselves to disputes and all the fiscal kind of things that are happening to people, and that we have to pay attention to structural variables that are out there that are the creators and the continuers of disputes, or more importantly, people being left out. And if all we do is individualize this stuff, that if we could just have better conversations and learn to have better conversations and better listeners, along with being talkers, that the sense is we kind of leave it at some of this, and some of it is at a personal level. But so much of what's going on in our society today, it seems to me, in this democracy, is these structural components are creating a lack of peace. If this kind of, who really think about how you do this at a level, but also really importantly, how one understands those, what we would refer to as the structural variables, and how it is that we are going to become practitioners to address those. And the interesting thing, if I may say, that was really the origins of social work.
It was.
It wasn't so much about being a therapist. It was about addressing issues of poverty and the frameworks around poverty and
something else.
Wages. I mean, what, and what was happening with labor unions or wasn't happening with labor unions, a range of kinds of things. And that's where I think the graduate program helped take what we do as practitioners, but create that broader look about personal interactions, but also about the variables that are happy to say, for instance, one of the wonderful faculty members in the program, I don't know if he's still there, worked for the Catholic Worker House here in England. He's a faculty member. I mean, that's that kind of, and Harry was in Cyprus, was a citizen peace activist. They had a letter to it that you're skilled, but you understand kind of the larger framework. Thank you for the question.
Well, my goal is to be a future peace studies master student.
Wonderful, thank you.
And my life goal is to dismantle the systemic racism that is in all these different systems of government and private sector.
Remarkable. And that,
at least shine a light on it.
Yeah. Well, if you can take away, if you would, John Gardner's thing, which I think is really kind of at the heart of an education, this kind of notion that he said of freedom and responsibility. We've been given a lot. We also, a lot of it's required of us. And how do we create our educational institutions that support that? So education doesn't just turn into a private good.
Yes. Amen.
Amen.
What a wonderful near wrap up. We're almost out of time. I wonder if you all would permit me to jump in.
Go for
it. Marvin, you give such a compelling narrative about how CR fit in with a vision that you and Judith were kind of working on in the 90s. And it's very compelling, and it has to do with, ingraining the university more in the fiber of the city and the life of the city and its citizens. And it's very convincing. It's very compelling. It's when I joined the faculty, and it was brand shiny new, and it was very exciting. But I wanted to just ask, was there opposition to CR? I mean, just to be a little cheeky here, like, were there people, who were the naysayers? Who were the obstacles? You don't have to name names per se.
Yeah. No, I won't name any names. Yeah.
But, or you can if you want to. It's when you're emeritus, you can do these things. But give us a sense of how hard, I mean, it sounds on the one hand, it was so exciting to hatch this vision, but of course there's always opposition. There's always navigation to undertake. So bring us back to a little bit of that.
Well, I think there were maybe two things that I think about. I'm sure there were more than that. One of them is, what business does an adjunct faculty member like Rob Gould having to come to us and want to develop a program? I mean, he has no standing, essentially. If you think about class differences, an adjunct faculty member, that was number one. But thank God for him and his resilience and vision about this, that it happened. I think there was the second one was around the structures of the university, about for people to kind of rise up and say, this is something I think we ought to be talking about, and I think we ought to think about where. Could we build a program like this, not unlike some of our other interdisciplinary programs on the campus, the criticism and critique of some of those, but but the structures of established organizations oftentimes, and academia is no different and maybe worse in a lot of ways, that we kind of get locked in to pathways for new ideas. And well, and he reminded me a while back, and I remember that too. We turned the first run of the graduate program into, and I don't say exactly where in the university, but it took a year to get a response to this. I mean, and you know, it's a great way to kill things, I guess, in that sense. But it didn't kill it there. So those are the couple of things that are there. So
that's very interesting.
Pardon?
Because, you know, we can tell the story, let's say, of Black studies as very much a grassroots demand by students, by community members, that, you know, we must have this, you know, in terms of keeping it, you know, keeping the movement going. It must happen. And one of the things we're struggling with as historians of Portland State is to hear the student voices in this particular chapter.
Yes. Well,
so it is
you know, yeah, it's an interesting about the student voices. I mean, the reality is, I remember way back when, this must have been in 1995, a conversation with Rob saying, why don't you bring the students so we can see the students that are interested in this, and let's make the case that there is student demand for this. You have to deal with, obviously, who in the world would want to take this kind of a program? And you know, and because of his work, a group of students, we'd rather a group of students, and it's pretty hard. And we took those into one of those faculty groups who had power over whether a program could be initiated or not. And when you get a group of students like that, so there is power there, that's for sure, but it isn't just individual power, it takes organizing that. And so many of these programs, as you say, Patricia, really could come out of that. And the other wonderful about that, I would hope if students really feel empowered through that kind of process, that's a learning that they will take with them for their lives. Whatever passion is about. It's about self-actualization in that sense, but around issues that really matter, issues of justice. So thank you for asking that question. You kind of forget, I tend to forget that once you feel like, you know, well, we work through that kind of stuff, but you know that, I mean, that's one of the issues today with arts and sciences, obviously. You know, how do we keep that kind of intellectual traditions and that all that background leads us to become people of responsibility? How do we keep that alive and appreciated? Thank you.
Thank you. My goodness, thank you.
Well, I want to say, Patricia, you were one of the great models. I never forget our first conversation about Ida B. Wells. And I've never forgotten, and thank you for bringing her and all that she has stood for in life. And then, of course, with Nick and all that he gave and what he modeled out here as what a public servant is about. Thank you,
Marvin. It's an important, May is an important month. You know, Ida B. Wells was just awarded the Pulitzer Prize posthumously. And it's another cause. Right? Yes, and it's another cause for celebration. I'm actually sort of kind of besties with her great-granddaughter, excuse me, Michelle Duster. And so she and I see each other at conferences, and we're Facebook buddies. And I just posted some stuff on my Facebook about her work in Chicago, where she's based. But yeah, no, it's a gift. History's a gift that keeps on giving, and these heroes, you know, and sheroes are they're our inspiration.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. That's right. Well, thank you for what you brought of her to Portland State and to this community.
It's been an honor to do this work. It's an honor.
Thank you.
So I think Oona is gonna close our lovely meeting today. Oh, you're muted.
That might have been why I wasn't talking before. All right. So yeah. So thank you so much for being here today. You're a very interesting person to talk to. I could listen to you. I could listen to you talk for a long time after this, but
I'll be
fortunately we have
careful.
to close out. But yes, I think I'm just gonna stop the recording now. And
Yeah, before you do that, can I tell you a story?
there you go.
It's a story about exactly what you were just talking about, and it's about legacies, I think, and about memory. I had a friend who he grew up here in Estacada. He became the president of Kent State University, and the guy he started a university in Alaska, knew everybody in the world. I swear to God, you know. So, but we became very close friends. And when he retired back here, but those of you who know John Prine, I hope you listen to a song called See Me Now. I think that's, I'm sorry, it's a wonderful song about age.
Mm-hmm.
But he came back here and no one paid attention to him. So they're a very bright guy. So one day I invited him to a seminar. It was a 3-hour seminar. And I said, well, I think given his history and stuff, the content we were working in, it was around aging related stuff. I thought it'd be really important. And he was so hungry to have someone listen to him that he talked for 3 hours solid in the seminar. Didn't take a question, nothing, you know. But it was wonderful what he said, but I was so saddened by that experience because he had such a need to talk about his life and what he had experienced. It was incredible what he had lived through and everything, but no one cared. That was the message, you know. So I'm sorry to add this on, but it was a lesson for me. That was.
We've been doing a ton of stuff specifically about oral interviews and the importance of hearing from people
that's
themselves.
Why a program like this really is important. Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Thank you for turning the recorder back on.
Oh, okay.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Good